Hello students, today we are going to read our chapter 2 of history, New Kings and Kingdoms. First we will read about the political developments of 700 to 1200 AD. After the death of Harshvardhana, his empire broke up into several small states and kingdoms. During this time, many warriors and chieftains came to power under the kings. They were called Samantas or subordinates. These Samantas under the king had fought the wars against the king's enemies in the past, but now they had grown more powerful and claimed political authority in a bigger area. In the course of time, parts of northern and western India were taken over by the Rajputs. The more important of the Rajput kingdoms were the Gurjara Pratiharas of Mandor, the Chauhanas of Ajmer, the Parmaras of Malwa, and the Chandelas of Bundelkhand. On the eastern side were the Palas, who were held sway in Bengal, the Deccan region. The Rashtrakutas and Chalukyas established their own powerful kingdoms, and the Pandyas and Cholas and Cheras ruled over southern parts of India. Other groups of people such as the Marathas, Sikhs, Jats, Ahoms, and Kayasthas also used the opportunity of the age to become politically important in specific areas. The tripartite struggle to gain control over the Kannauj from 750 to 900 AD. The tripartite struggle. This period was marked by a long tripartite struggle. Tripartite struggle means three parties were involved. That's why this struggle for Kannauj was called the tripartite struggle. And these three parties were the Gurjara Pratiharas, Palas, and Rashtrakutas. These are the three dynasties of various areas which fought for the control over Kannauj. All the three dynasties tried to control Harsha's capital city Kannauj. This city was ideally situated near the banks of river Ganga to provide it with good communication links with other territories and strategic military security of the hills. It was a flourishing center of trade and had a prosperous agricultural population paying the much needed taxes to the states. Because of the taxes, this area of Kannauj was the center of attraction for the Gurjara Pratiharas, Palas, and Rashtrakutas. The Pratiharas and Rashtrakutas also tried to control Malwa and Gujarat for their commercial benefits. The basic underlying motivation for all these three kingdoms was to increase their prestige and fame by defeating the other parts, because all these parts were very influential in their own areas and everyone tries to capture the other areas to become more powerful and to hold more area. So by the 10th century AD, these kingdoms declines. The Rashtrakutas were overthrown by the later Chalukyas, the Palas by the Senas, and the Gurjara Pratiharas by the new Pratiharas. Next is the Rajputs. The Rajput claimed descent from Kshatriyas. They protected their land and religion with patriotism. Their contribution to the politics and culture of India between 8th to 12th centuries was so immense that this period of Indian history came to be called the Rajput period. According to the literature development by the poets in around 9 to 10 centuries, the several kingdoms of central and western India, the rulers called themselves as Rajputs. They claimed their descent from sun and the moon. The historians believed that these rulers were descendants of the tribes like Shakas, Kushanas, and Hunas who came to India from the northwestern regions outside India, and the Gurjaras and Gonds, which were Indian forest tribes. They adopted lofty titles like Suryavanshi and Chandravanshi and called themselves as Kshatriyas. The Pratiharas were the first to acquire the Rajput status. Some Rajputs claim their descent from Agnikula, the family started by a mythical figure that arose from the sacrificial fire pit near Mount Abu in Rajasthan. The four most important kingdoms that arose from the ruins of older Pratihara kingdom were the Chandelas of Bundelkhand. The Chauhanas had their center at Shakambari, southeast of Delhi. The Solankis of Gujarat and Kathiawad. The Parmaras established their control in Malwa with their capital at Dhar near Indore. Rajputs were not just the rulers, but they were the soldiers and commanders who served in the armies of different kings all over the subcontinent. So they were having the qualities. The political condition of North India during the early medieval period was not very stable. The Hindus and Rajput chiefs, full of individual courage and big egos, could never attain stable sovereignty over a large area of land. As a result, one major factor that got neglected during this period was the vigil on northwest frontier borders by the Indian rulers and governors. That's why many of the Muslim invaders came from northwest and they attacked India. The Muslim invasions of India. First, the Arab invasions of Sindh. Muhammad bin Qasim was an Arab general who attacked on Sindh in 712 AD. He defeated Dahir, who was the ruler of Sindh at that time, and Dahir fought very bravely. He also captured Multan in 713 AD. Second is the invasions of Mahmud of Ghazni, an ambitious Turkish chief called Subutkin, the Amir of Ghazni or the ruler of Ghazni, began raiding India. One of his sons, Mahmud of Ghazni, attacked India several times and taking back with him the vast riches from this land. Mahmud of Ghazni captured Kangra, Mathura, Kannauj, Thanesar, Gwalior, and Somnath. He was the first Muslim ruler to invade Kabul for capturing India's fabled wealth. Mahmud was deeply religious man, but also a practical imperialist. In 997 AD, he received the investiture from the Khalifa, recognizing his power over the region. The investiture provided the spiritual sanction to his plundering raids into India. He projected himself to be the breaker of the idols. He attacked the major temples of India, which held untold wealth from various grants made to them by religious people and powerful rulers. He collected the booty, destroyed the temples, and earned himself the loyalty of the Muslim soldiers whose lives were dictated by the tenets of Islam. Next are the invasions of Muhammad Ghori and the Battle of Tarayan. Muhammad Ghori was a general under Ghorid dynasty. Ghor in Afghanistan was a vassal state of Ghazni Empire. When the Ghaznis started weakening, the Ghoris declared their independence in 1160 AD. He then conquered Multan, Peshawar, and Lahore. The main reason for the success of Turks in India was the lack of unity among the Rajput chiefs. Muhammad Ghori was an orthodox Sunni Muslim who really wanted to establish Islam in India. Between 1175 to 79, he attacked and captured the old Muslim colonies of Sindh, Multan, annexed Peshawar, and ravaged Lahore in Punjab to teach a lesson to Khusro Malik, who had been continuously resisting him. In 1189 AD, Muhammad Ghori besieged the fort of Sirhind. It pitted him against the Rajput ruler Prithvi Raj Chauhan, who ruled the territory from Ajmer to Delhi. The Chauhan ruler proved to be Ghori's most formidable enemy. That's why he fought two battles with Prithvi Raj Chauhan. The first battle of Tarain in 1191 AD. The first battle of Tarain was fought between Muhammad Ghori and Prithvi Raj Chauhan. Muhammad Ghori was defeated in the first battle of Tarain by Prithvi Raj Chauhan, and Ghori was badly wounded in the battle and returned to his own place. The second battle of Tarain in 1192 AD. Next year, in 1192 AD, Muhammad Ghori again attacked the Chauhana ruler Prithvi Raj Chauhan with full preparation. In this battle, Prithvi Raj Chauhan was captured, defeated, and killed. In 1194 AD, Muhammad Ghori defeated Jaichand, the Gahadawala ruler of Kannauj. Qutbuddin Aibak and Bakhtiar Khalji, these were the two generals of Muhammad Ghori. They completed the Indian conquest of Muhammad Ghori by reaching up to Bihar and Bengal. Muhammad Ghori was killed in 2005 AD, and he gave his Indian empire to Qutbuddin Aibak, who established first slave dynasty in India under the Delhi Sultanate. Now we will read about the Chola Empire in South from 9th to 12th century. The Chola dynasty rose to prominence when in 850 AD its founder Vijayala defeated the Pallavas and snatched Tanjore from them. Tanjore was then made the capital of Cholas. By the end of 9th century, the Cholas were able to defeat the Pandyas too, bringing the southern Tamil country under their control. Vijayalaya, who was the founder of Chola Empire, he captured the Kaveri Delta from Muthayar in the middle of 9th century. He built the town of Tanjavur. He also built a temple of goddess Nishambasudhini there. Chola kingdom grew in size and power with the conquest of neighboring areas by the successors of Vijayalaya. The Pandyan and Pallava territories to the south and north became part of Chola kingdom. Raja I was considered the most powerful Chola ruler. He became king in 985 AD and he expanded his control over most of the areas mentioned above, like the areas of whole of the southern India. He recognized the administration of the empire. His son Rajendra I continued his policies and even raided the Ganga Valley, Sri Lanka, and countries of Southeast Asia. He developed a navy for these expeditions. Expansion of foreign trade. The Cholas excelled in foreign trade and maritime activities. Maritime activities mean through the sea routes. They trade with China, Malaya, Baghdad, etc. Kaveripatnam and Nagapattinam were the major port towns from where the trade was held with other countries. Agriculture and irrigation. Chola rulers constructed many tanks, canals, wells, embankments for providing the peasants with water for irrigation. The river Kaveri and its channels were used for this purpose. Chola rulers cleared forests and forest lands to bring more land under cultivation. During Chola period, irrigation works were developed, like wells were dug, canals were built, tanks were constructed to collect rainwater. Chola rulers built embankments to prevent flooding. Kaveri River provided water for irrigation and also fertile soil. Nature of the government. There was a single government for the whole of South India. Tanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram were the imperial capitals. Kanchipuram and Madurai were the regional capitals in which occasion courts were held. Central administration. The king was the supreme commander and all the authority was in his hands only. A council of ministers advised the king on important issues. The Cholas maintained a huge army with elephants, cavalry, and infantry. They also had a great navy, which dominated the eastern and western coast of South India and for some time the entire Bay of Bengal. A powerful bureaucracy assisted the king in the administrative works and in executing his orders. Provincial administration. The whole empire was divided into provinces, and these provinces were known as mandalams. Mandalams were again divided into kotam or valnadus. These valnadus were again divided into nadus, and each nadu comprised of a group of villages. Local government. Every village was administered by an assembly called Ur. Sometimes few villages were grouped together and administered by Mahasabha. These assemblies collected the revenue and other dues or the taxes and settled minor disputes. Punishments for minor crimes or disputes were in the form of fines, or sometimes charity is also taken from the offender. And for the crimes such as murder or manslaughter, punishments were also to be completed with fines. The temple architecture and bronze sculptures. Brihadeshwara Temple at Tanjavur and Gangai Konda Cholapuram Temple are the main examples of Chola temples. Raja Raja and Rajendra built splendid temples at Tanjavur and Gangai Konda Cholapuram. There were various economic, social, and cultural activities associated with Chola temples. The temples became the knuckle of settlements that grew around them. These were the centers of craft production like bronze images. Temples receive huge land endowments from the rulers. Temples, the land grants which were given to the temples were for the income of the temples. The produce of these lands went into maintaining all the specialities who worked and lived near the temples, like priests, garland makers, cooks, sweepers, musicians, etc. The Chola rulers often inscribed details of their achievements on the walls of these temples. That is why we know a lot of things about the Cholas than the dynasties that came before it, because they tried to scribe the things on the walls of the temple so that people can know about them afterwards also. Next is the inscriptions as a source to reconstruct history. Stone inscriptions by the Chola rulers themselves and copper plate grants by the Pandyas and Chalukyas have been instrumental in constructing the history of Cholas. The inscriptions show the high level of literacy and education. Inscriptions from Uttaramerur tells about the organization of Sabha. There were separate committees within the Sabha to look after irrigation works, gardens, temples, etc. From the inscriptions, lots of information we can take about those rulers. Raja Rajendra was at the forefront of the most of his father's military campaigns. All this information we can gather from the inscription of Raja Dhiraj. With this, we conclude our chapter. Have a nice day and thank you.